Hello and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacey Lee. Please hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. It helps a lot. You can also join my Patreon. We are in the midst of a fundraiser there for a very important cause. I will talk about that at the end of the video. As we plod forward blindly into the future, I see things that are wonderful, that are inspiring, and also that are terrifying. I am an admitted technology nerd. Well, maybe I used to be. I feel like I'm starting to fall behind as I get older, but I do like to keep up on breaking medical procedures and technology. I think when we hit about 40 or so, we start hoping, for new procedures that will save us from the fate of so many that came before us. Alzheimer's, cancers, hearing loss, vision loss, pain reduction. And it's always exciting to hear that there are new techniques on the horizon to help those in need. A lot of those new techniques require a human body for parts. There has always been a market for human corpses. It dates back to the Dark Ages, and we're going to talk about that. The types of desperate criminals who were hired to dig up the dead as recently as 100 years ago, it's quite something. Those practices have, of course, stopped, and now we are supposed to trade organ and bones and corneas legally. Bone is especially important, with more and more uses for that material needed all the time. So when a Brooklyn doctor began to grow in popularity among people who needed new bone, needing transplants, it seemed like a godsend to many. But this doctor hadn't been sent by God. If you're a believer, you would definitely say he was sent by the other guy. This is a tale of greed. It's a tale of callous behavior by people we should all trust. It's a tale about broken promises, and it is a tale about gore. This is the gruesome story of Dr. Michael Mastromarino, the story of the Brooklyn body snatcher. I'm your host, Stacey Lee. Let's get into it. Dr. Michael Mastromarino has formed a company called Biomedical Tissue Services based in Fort Lee, New Jersey. The company specialized in harvesting bone to be used in grafts for people in need of transplants. What for? Many people have fractures that won't heal without a graft. For people with diseases like bone cancer, bone grafts are very important. And this will also become very ironic later in the story. But the most common cause for bone grafts is in dental work. When people lose a tooth, it's common to need a bone graft in order to place the hardware required to implant the new tooth. If people have poor dental health to the point that they're losing teeth, that often means the bone around the tooth is weak and needs to be grafted. Now, obviously, I'm telling you all this from what I read about this. I am in no way an expert on any of this. I do a lot of reading for these episodes. Even some people with better dental health apparently will need bone grafts from time to time. It's not an uncommon procedure, but it is common if you're getting a dental implant, and those, as you know, are becoming a lot more commonplace. Because of recent advances in this type of science, the market for bone is huge. I read some numbers, it's like in the billions of dollars. Grave robbing went out of fashion about 100 years ago, but rest assured, the trade in human remains dates back centuries. In the 18th century, it was necessary to obtain human corpses for surgeons who were studying anatomy. There was a legal market for that purpose, but the bodies were expensive and the schools did not make a lot of money. They also weren't very well regulated. So why would a medical school want to spend so much money to obtain a dead body legally when they could just pay some guys to dig up the freshly buried? I kind of want to do a full episode on this because this is the kind of stuff that I really get interested in. These medical schools even had a euphemism for the grave robbers to make the practice seem less ghoulish. They called the grave diggers resurrectionists. I always find it funny how the upper class can come up with any means necessary to justify their bad behavior, even coming up with words that sound less seedy. These resurrectionists had a type. They wanted fully grown adults, so the bodies had to be more than 16 or 17 years of age. They preferred people who had died of consumption, which of course is tuberculosis. Why? Because those bodies were emaciated. The people had died long, drawn-out deaths, and they were always very thin when they finally died. And this meant that the medical students didn't have to spend time scraping fat from underneath the skin before getting to the veins and the muscles and the internal organs that they were studying. Well, at least I'm safe from grave robbers. I know you guys only see me from about here up. My husband says I'm very hard on myself, but when I got sick, I put on about 30 pounds. I've lost about 15 of it though. But yeah, if I die, even when I get old, I just like food too much. So there would be a need for fat scraping is what I'm trying to say. The scam worked like this. The resurrectionists worked in teams. One man drove the wagon, which he would park away from the cemetery. Two other men would then dig up the body. One would dig while the other would keep watch, and then they would take turns, with the shovel. They had a tarp and they had a crowbar, and they would use that to pry open the casket or the box. They also brought with them rope, and they only used wooden shovels because they made less sound than the metal ones. I've never even seen a wooden shovel. I don't think I have. So when they got the coffin open, the rope was used to tie around the head and the shoulders of the corpse and drag it up out of its casket and onto the tarp, where it would then be wrapped and dragged to the waiting wagon. The wagon would then transport the body directly to a waiting medical school teacher or administrator who really didn't care where the body was coming from, just that they weren't paying much money for it. So this to me is fascinating stuff. It goes much deeper than this. Let me know if you'd like an episode on grave robbing, because there is a lot of really gruesome and fascinating information. It's very educational. But those times are long past. No one digs up graves anymore, but the demand for human corpses is higher now than ever. We humans carry interchangeable parts. We can be stripped like a machine, like a wrecked car, and the parts that are still good can be harvested and used again. Hearts and livers and kidneys are the most important because they save lives, but there are a lot more body parts that have uses. Veins are used for bypass in heart surgery. The membrane around the heart can be used as a net around the brain after neurosurgery. I had no idea. The membranes around our muscles are used to sling up bladders. Like if you have incontinence and you get bladder surgery, the sling that they use is made from membranes from corpse muscles. Ligaments and tendons can be transplanted to return mobility to those who have lost it, and corneas can restore vision to those who have lost part of their vision. Skin from dead bodies is also in high demand. It can be used to replace skin on a living person that has been badly burned. It might be a ghoulish market to some, but it is a big one, and there is a lot of money to be made. Dr. Michael Mastromarino wanted a chunk of that money very badly. So we need to talk a little bit about how he got there. Dr. Mastromarino started out as a very well-known and successful maxillofacial surgeon. He had offices in Midtown Manhattan and in New Jersey. He was also an author. He wrote the book, Smile, How Dental Implants Can Transform Your Life. In that book, he writes that just as orthopedic surgeons can change lives by rebuilding hips and knees, he can change lives by rebuilding smiles. He explains that bone grafting used to be difficult and painful, but that, quote, breakthroughs in tissue engineering have come to the rescue, and today we can literally put bone wherever you need it. That's what he said. I couldn't help myself, you guys. It was right there. The co-author of this book, Michael Weiland, would later say of Michael Mastromarino, he wasn't the best in the country at his work, but he was a very competent young doctor until he wasn't. Like so many other doctors, Michael Mastromarino's downfall became getting high on his own supply. He had back pain. He took a little Demerol, then he took a little more, and a little more. By spring of 2000, friends and family began to notice that Michael didn't look like himself anymore. He looked tired. His dental assistants began talking amongst themselves, and they had all noticed that the doctor wasn't doing great work anymore. There were times during procedures when he looked confused, and his skin was always kind of an ashen color. And then he started sweating profusely all the time. I'm sure I'm sadly describing people that you know because this is a horrible epidemic right now. Within months, it was very apparent Dr. Michael Mastromarino was a drug addict. One day, he fell asleep while standing over a patient in surgery, literally asleep on his feet. His assistant tapped him on the hand to wake him up. On another day, the doctor came out of the bathroom with his scrub pants down around his ankles. It got worse. Someone walked into the office bathroom and found the doctor on the floor with a hypodermic needle sticking out of his arm and blood on the floor. Not only that, this happened while he had a patient under general anesthesia on the operating table. Now, I want to stop here for just a moment because I keep saying there's a big part of my life story that I haven't told here. I once had to try to report someone and I was met with a brick wall. These kinds of white-collar professionals really protect each other. If you or I worked in a restaurant or a mechanic shop or as a school teacher, and just one of those instances occurred on the job, we would be fired immediately. But because this is a doctor, or a lawyer, or sometimes an accountant, people are kind of scared to say anything. They know what's at stake. They know these people have been to school for years to get their degrees, so they don't want to ruin their career. What I would ask is, do you want to be responsible for the death or maiming of a patient or the destruction of a client's lives? Because by not reporting this stuff, you are. I know it's not fun to be a whistleblower. Believe me. But damn, looking confused during surgery, leaving a patient on the table and falling asleep. His assistants covered for him for too long, in my opinion. He should have been reported immediately, but he wasn't. And then, what always happens in these stories, they hurt someone. In June of 2000, Michael Mastromarino damaged a woman's cranial nerve, which left her with a permanent facial droop. This was the straw that broke the camel's back, and someone called the medical board. 10 days later, Michael was arrested in Fort Lee for possession of Demerol and a hypodermic needle while being under the influence of a controlled dangerous substance. That was it. He had hit rock bottom. There went his medical practice, his huge income, his license, his reputation. He lost everything. Michael Mastromarino was married at the time. He has 2 sons. He had a beautiful home, a beautiful wife. He had everything anyone could ever want, and he had thrown it all away to get high. He hired a high-powered attorney and he went to rehab. He surrendered his license to practice dentistry, and then he began looking for other ways to make a living. He began reaching out to friends and contacts, swearing he was clean and sober. He was a skilled man. This was a very knowledgeable man, a trained man, and he had extensive education, and he did find someone who was willing to take a chance on him. On this list of contacts that the doctor was reaching out to was a company called Artix, Regeneration Technologies Incorporated, which is one of the largest tissue banks in the country. Not only does this company peddle in human bone and tissue, it manufactures things like bone dowels and bone matrix, as well as pastes and pins and screws, things that are all used during transplants. Well, this was right up Michael's alley. He had used Artix products for years and he knew them very well. And so he decided to contact the company. He reached out and kind of made his pitch. He said that as a surgeon, he could do a better job at marketing their products than any salesperson could. It's a strong argument. I would probably listen to a doctor more than a salesperson. He said he could also do a better job of training surgeons on how to use the products. Artix agreed, and soon Michael was working for them, bringing in more tissue and better tissue than they had ever had access to before. Michael had no problem using his skills on the dead instead of the living. He was good at it, and Artix was happy with him. Michael went through the process and got his tissue harvesting license, and then he approached Artix with the idea of building relationships with funeral homes. This was revolutionary. No one had thought of this before. Apparently, in this industry, the problem with getting people's organs and tissue is that a lot of people don't want to be cut up and sold for parts. I don't understand why. You're not using your body anymore. What do you care what happens to it? But this is also coming from someone who wants like a Viking funeral, like set me on fire and like have a barbecue over my body. What do I care? But apparently not everyone feels that way. Michael felt that if he could foster relationships with funeral homes, they could begin marketing for him even before people died. Like when people would come in to plan their own funeral, the morticians could discuss the process of organ and bone donation with them, and then those parts would go directly to Michael's company. It was a very good idea, and RTIX agreed. Michael Mastromarino first began by recruiting undertakers. He offered them $1,000 a corpse. Now, this was a no-brainer for the morticians, who only had to get the grieving family members to sign off, telling them that their loved one would be helping someone else live. There was a bonus. On top of signing to give away the organs and the tissues, the family would get some sort of a bonus, like an upgraded casket or upgraded flowers for the funeral. The undertaker got the full $1,000 bucks. The work started coming in quickly, so quickly that Michael put out word he needed another harvester. He needed to bring in someone to help him. It was too much for one person. In 2003, a nurse at Beth Israel named Lee Crescetta told his boss he needed to pick up extra shifts to make more money. His boss said, "Why don't you take that job harvesting bodies for RTIX?" Well, that's exactly what Lee did. He had a wife and 4 kids to support, and this was extra money that was needed. Lee actually liked the work. He had a fascination with the human body, and he later told a reporter, quote, "I have a different take on things. I know what you look like on the inside." So Lee and Michael team up, and they go to work in the low-income areas of New York like Harlem and the Bronx. They moved into markets like Newark and Philadelphia. The money was fast and it was easy. I mean, do you know how many people die every day? Every mortician was interested in making a quick $1,000 for doing absolutely nothing. The main supplier for Michael and Lee was a mortuary in Bensonhurst called Daniel George and Son. So what would happen is the corpse would come in, Lee would get a phone call, he'd make the drive to the mortuary, and the body would just be sitting there, laid out on a table waiting for him. He even had a key. They didn't even have to be there to meet him. He would just come in and take the body. Kind of thought this stuff was all a little more regulated than it is. I mean, apparently the most sought after parts of the human body are what they call the long bones of the body. The long bones of the legs, the long bones of the arms. This is where the story gets very gruesome. The morticians started thinking, I don't really need to get the signatures from the families. Some of the morticians thought, I'll just tell the families that they're taking, you know, like the heart and the lungs. They're going to save a little kid's life. The families of these dead people had no idea what was actually going to happen to the dead body of their relative. The money was coming in so quickly, and this was such a lucrative job that they got sloppy. They stopped caring about all the rules and all of the ethics, and they really did turn into ghouls. First off, they were supposed to wait till after the funeral to take some of the body parts, but they just didn't want to. Oh, this is gruesome. Lee would go in and take everything that he wanted, and then he would have to put the body back together enough that it could be viewed. If there was a viewing scheduled and he didn't want to wait for the long bones, he would saw the legs off just below the hip, leaving the top half of the body intact for the viewing. Then he would take a piece of PVC pipe, like you run for a sprinkler system, and he would screw the PVC pipe into place to replace the long bones that had been taken. Do you want ghosts? Because this is how you get ghosts. Lee would use this powder on the places where he sawed. It would immediately clot any sort of liquid or blood that would leak from the body, so there wouldn't be like stains on the clothing. The morticians, for the most part, knew this was going on. So the torsos were cut open and the organs were removed. The families usually knew this was happening in the beginning, and then the torso would be stuffed with things like paper to make the corpse appear more presentable. A lot of the families would later claim that they did not understand this is how the process would work, and some of the families said they never signed off on anything. They were all horrified to learn that when they had viewed their loved one's body, it was basically plastic and paper. Cremations? Well, those were an entirely different thing. Lee didn't have to worry about messing up hair or tissue, so he went at those bodies with a Sawzall. You know what a Sawzall is? It's a power tool that works kind of like an electric knife back and forth. See how I went like this? I've learned not to make any up and down hand motions because then I get weird memes in my DMs of myself. But with the Sawzall, Lee could easily remove an entire spine. He would dismantle the body like you would dismantle a car. For some of the especially callous undertakers, Lee didn't even have to flip the body back over or plug the holes when he was done. These undertakers would throw what was left on the body. This is so unbelievable. It sounds like I'm making this up. And they would roll the body down the block from the funeral home to the crematorium. People who lived in the neighborhood got accustomed to seeing a trail of blood and tissue on the sidewalk between the two buildings. Look, I know I'm from a small town. New York is just, it's another world, man. If something like that happened here, you would have like 450 Karens. It would be on St. George word of mouth in 5 minutes, 300 calls to 911. People would be standing around taking pictures. New York is a different world. People just mind their business there. Vegas is a lot like that too. That's what I love about Vegas. It is just, people just mind their business there. Here it's like, oh, what's going on over here? You know, everybody has to get like right in the middle of it. When I got in my car wreck about a week and a half ago, before I was even home from the hospital, there were videos of my wreck and of me loaded up on Facebook all over the place. So that was fun. I was especially glad that I had gone into town that day dressed like a hobo. But these neighbors got accustomed to just knowing that there was a body being taken from one place to the other, and they said it smelled, and they would often see pieces of body parts. But it's New York. Later on, as things progressed, Lee would take great offense to being lumped in with these types of characters. He didn't like being called a ghoul. He said he did good work, clean work. He never left a mess. He tried to do things by the book. So, you know, Lee even says that he admired Michael Mastromarino and thought he was a good guy. He thought they were doing something good. They were helping people. They were saving lives by harvesting these bodies. The problem was the whole thing was completely illegal. Word started to get around of like full body bags being dragged out of vans at 3 in the morning. And then the next morning there'd be like giant garbage bags leaking fluids and stuff after Lee had come in and did his thing. Dogs and cats would get into the bags and drag body parts all over the street. There were bloody surgical gloves and aprons, discolored cotton swabs, and there was lots and lots of hair. Like I'm telling you, this would be a major news story in my town and a lot of other places. Business got so busy that Lee could not keep up with it on his own. Michael Mastromarino, you know, he wasn't going to go out and do the dirty work anymore. So he decided to hire a third member of the harvesting team. Michael was now just kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing. Lee was doing all the heavy lifting. But now he was going to have help in a man named Chris Alderossi. Chris and Lee would take the tissue off the corpse, bag it and label it, remove all of the bones, and then take it to Michael. Michael would then spend time cleaning up the harvested parts for resale. In a year, less than a year, they were making millions of dollars. It seemed too good to be true because it was. I mean, let's run the numbers. They were paying $1,000 for a body and selling the parts off for sometimes 15 grand per body. Michael built a mansion in New Jersey that had heated driveways, so he didn't have to shovel snow in the winter. There were vacations and parties and cars and jewelry. He was paying Lee a salary plus $200 off of each $1,000 he got for the corpse. $200 while Michael was making $15,000. Minus the $1,000 that he would pay the undertaker. They were doing 25 harvests a month, sometimes more. So Lee was making really good money. His salary plus like $5 grand a month more on the bodies. For Michael Mastromarino, it was $300,000 a month at times. We're in the wrong business, you guys. What am I doing? Researching and writing and filming 60 hours a week for free. What am I doing? Sometimes it just sucks not to be a criminal. I couldn't handle jail though. I am a creature of comfort. I could not handle jail for a day. Finally, something starts to bother Lee. As a nurse, he knew enough about transplants to know that the bodies had to be free of disease. But Michael didn't seem to care about that. Lee brought it up to Michael several times and Michael brushed it aside. Now remember, Lee thought this was all legal, or so he claims. He thought this was all above board. But he had these concerns that they might be taking diseased tissue. Lee said it was normal and usual to go take a body from someone who had died of like a heart attack. But then when he would open the body up, there were lesions all over the bones, which is bone cancer. In the beginning, if he found something like that, he would throw the bones out. But then Michael started asking why this body doesn't have any long bones or this body doesn't have any jaw bones. When Lee told him, because they were riddled with cancer, Michael said, "Bring them anyway." Lee claims that he would always argue with Michael, but that in the end, he did what he was told. When Lee told the mortuary owners that he wouldn't take a body because it was malnourished or diseased, the mortuary owners would call Michael and complain that Lee didn't want to take in the work. So then Lee had pressure from his boss. The scheme went on, and it is a very harsh and disturbing reminder of just how little many of us care for the dead, But then along came a body that many, many people cared about, and it would be the beginning of the end. Michael and Lee are at a conference in Florida when Michael's cell phone rings, and it's Chris, the new team member. He is calling to tell Michael that he's been called to the Harlem funeral home where they do a lot of business, but that when he got there, the body on the table was Alistair Cook. Now, if you do not know who Alistair Cooke is, he was very, very famous and well respected. He was a British-American writer who worked as a radio broadcaster, a journalist, and a television personality, but he's probably best known for being the host of Masterpiece Theater on PBS. That's a position he held from 1971 to 1992. Now, those were back in the days when people did not have 5,000 cable channels. PBS was like a main channel. Everybody knew who Alistair Cooke was. This man was considered a national treasure. And now, here he was, dead, lying on the mortuary table. And Chris was worried that maybe they should pass this one up. No, Michael said, go ahead. It was just a body to him. Chris asked what Michael wanted him to do, and Michael simply answered, proceed. Chris removed Alistair Cooke's diseased heart and cancerous bones. He bagged up the bones, and then he removed the back skin, the chest skin, and then he took the heart valves and veins. The remains were then very sloppily put back together for Alistair's daughter, Susan Kittredge, to receive later as his ashes. Susan would later say that the men delivering these ashes came almost in the middle of the night, and she thought that was so strange. When Alistair Cooke died, he was taken from his Fifth Avenue apartment to this little Gothic funeral parlor on 115th Street. When Susan got there with her father's body, there was a man waiting with a knife, and she said she thought that was strange. But you know, people don't die in your life every day. You don't know what the procedures are. Susan said they cared nothing for my 95-year-old father. He was just a corpse to them. 48 hours later, Susan had her father's ashes returned to her. Unbeknownst to Susan, things were changing for Michael and his crew. Questions were being raised and investigations were being undertaken because, you see, the owners of the Daniel George Mortuary sold the business, and the new owners came in and were absolutely horrified when they found out what the arrangement was between the mortuary and the former doctor. They were even more horrified when they found out that they were skirting over the process of getting the family's approval. These new owners of the mortuary immediately called the police, and the investigation began and revealed that Michael had been breaking all of the laws of consent. Like I said, it had reached a point where the morticians weren't even talking to the families anymore. They even went so far as to forge records, making the bodies look healthier than they were. So if somebody came in diseased, they would just leave that off. When the police went to the mortuary and stood over the hydraulic lift at the funeral home, apparently the lift was just covered in blood and gunk and body parts. They weren't even bothering to clean it off anymore. Can you imagine the smell? They said there was literally like a pile of broken bones at the bottom of the hydraulic lift. There was no care for the dead. There was no dignity. And worse even, what about the people who had been receiving the diseased tissue and bones as transplants? Months went by, and Susan Kittredge grieved the death of her famous father. And then, just before Christmas in 2005, as the investigation had been going on, her phone rang. On the other line was a detective from the Brooklyn DA's office, and he asked if her father was the Alistair Cooke. And she said yes, he was. The detective whistled through his teeth and then told her Alistair's body had been hacked to bits before he was cremated. Ghouls had stolen his organs and his bones. This detective wanted to call Susan personally and tell her because the story was about to break nationwide. Susan said she hung up the phone and stood there in silence with her mouth open. The tabloids were the first to grab the story. Personal injury lawyers came out of the woodwork to take on the family's cases. People were horrified to learn that they might be carrying diseased tissue and bone placed in their bodies by doctors they trusted, doctors who trusted the service that they were getting the materials from. Families gave interviews saying they were having nightmares about their loved ones being butchered. It was all almost too ghastly and gruesome to believe, but it was all true. The feds came in and shut down LifeCell, one of Michael's biggest customers. RTIX hurriedly cut all ties, claiming that it had received only minimal material from Michael. Lee Cruchetta quickly made a deal for himself to testify against Michael, who was trying to play dumb, saying he thought everything was being done above board. Michael Mastromarino was arrested. The FDA and the New York State Health Department made public statements trying to calm the public, saying the risks of disease through tissue transplant are low. Michael was then charged in 2006, along with his 2 harvesters and an embalmer. He went to trial and pled guilty in 2008 to charges of enterprise corruption, reckless endangerment, and body stealing. At his sentencing, some of the tissue and bone recipients were allowed to speak.
Without knowing for certain, I would guess that most of the money he has made is gone, yet the bone and tissue in my mouth will never be gone. It will forever be a part of me, as will the questions of what this may do to me. I wish I knew for certain what medical problems I face in the future. I wish I could say that the 80-year-old bone cancer-ridden body that Mr. Mastromarino decided to hack up and sell for millions will not equate to some type of cancer in my body. But no one, no doctors, no scientists have been able to tell me what the possible outcome of Mr. Mastromarino's actions will be in that regard.
I had to undergo DNA testing to prove that she was my mother and what tissue that they found was hers. And now all I picture her is in an evidence locker somewhere instead of at rest. It's horrible what they did, and I'll never be the same. I hate myself every day for picking the funeral home that I picked because of him.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to apologize for the pain and grief I've caused all the donor families and donor recipients. I'm truly sorry for all the pain I've caused you. I'd also like to apologize to my family for all the pain I've caused them through this tumultuous 3 years. I'm truly, truly sorry from the deepest parts of my heart. May God have mercy on my soul. Thank you.
Michael was sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. He and his wife, Barbara, were ordered to pay almost $5 million in restitution and attorney's fees. Barbara divorced Michael and wrote a book. Michael went off to prison, but in one of the greatest twists of irony and displays of karma I have personally ever seen, was soon stricken with bone cancer. At just 49 years old, he had developed metastatic liver cancer, and after that, he was dead. He'd spent a little over 7 years in prison. I tried to find recent articles about what has happened to the living victims, people who received tissue and bone from diseased corpses. I could not find a single article. I'm sure there is a message board out there, maybe a Reddit thread, a Facebook group, where those people are staying in contact, waiting and hoping that they're okay. I find their plight to be much more tragic than a body that's being cut up. And maybe it's because I don't see death as something to be ritualized or reverenced. I understand not everyone thinks like I do. I think what happened to the dead people is horrific, but imagine living knowing that there just might be a ticking time bomb in your body. A bomb you agreed to have placed there because you trusted your doctor who trusted their supplier. I've said this many times when we talk about registering guns. We can track a boat, we can track a motorcycle, we can track a car, from the very time of its manufacture through every owner it ever has. We can require teenagers to get a license in order to flip burgers at a fast food restaurant. We license marriages and we license dogs. Hell, you have to have a permit to catch a fish in a lake. But for some reason, when we go to track or rein in the deadliest things among us, guns, career criminals, bad doctors, that can't be done. Keep your damn guns. I'm keeping mine. I'm just saying they should be registered and tracked. Keep your doctors. I will keep mine. I'm just saying when they're doing things like falling asleep on their feet and passing out in the bathroom, the cover-ups need to end. What is it about our society that is so offended by the notion of protecting people from things that are dangerous? What is it about our culture that refuses to take on the issues that cause so many people heartbreak and death? We don't have to take things away, but in the examples that I've given, it's obvious we know how to regulate stuff. It works. We do it in lots of instances. You would think, of all the things we regulate, the manner in which human body parts are harvested and put into other people's bodies would be at the top of that list, you would think. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacey Lee. Hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to support me, and you can join my Patreon. There is a video up on my channel. This is the thumbnail. It will give you all the information you need to know. We are raising money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested. Watch the video and it will tell you all the details. You don't have to donate 20 bucks. You can donate $1. I would love it if everybody donated $1. I want to thank you for your support. You guys are so kind and supportive, and you also teach me so much in the comments. I really enjoy our interaction. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacey Lee. Bye.